Thank you very much. So Peter, now we honour Leah is now presenting, as I understand it, the item 9, the LTP 2021 Closeout Report. So Leah, item 9, let's come to you for opening remarks on this report, please.
No, I think Peter's doing it.
Okay,
right?
so on my run sheet I've got you, but Peter's here in the room. No, that's all right.
So you're welcome to it, Leah.
Come to you for some opening remarks on this report.
Okay, no problem. Basically, this committee asked for a report back in April on the LTP to close out lessons learned while the memories are still fresh. We did that not by narrative, but by running a survey that went through both senior management of staff right the way down to operational level. It also included community boards and elected members. As you'll recall, we ran that over an extended period to get more feedback. That was analysed by the monitoring and research team using the same approach that they did for submissions to the LTP. That produced quite a clear, plain English document. Hopefully this is in the same vein. The results are attached and we'll move to those in a moment. The Audit and Risk Committee has also requested a copy of it. The objective, of course, is that we acknowledge the good parts of the process and we take any lessons learned forward into future letters of expectation from councillors and the future LTP processes. There may even be some knock on into annual plan processes, but by and large, it will really reflect on the next LTP. So the purpose of this was to break it down by component of the LTP, understand what went well, what didn't, and what we need to remember next time. So that's the basis of this document. Moving forward to the closeout report itself, just bear with me while I'm juggling several screens here. The key messages are summarised on the front page. They're summarised very nicely and in a succinct way. The key point is that the co-development process between councillors and staff went very well. There was almost unanimous feedback on that. There was full transparency of OPEX review and savings, a deep understanding of the capital program. We saw information that had never been put in such a strategic way before. It was a lift up from the operational level of the last few years. The activity plans gave everybody a very thorough view of every part of the engine room of the organisation. Levels of service were clear to councillors and transparent, including those for internal services. So it was a very thorough review. Sometimes, at times, a little tedious, but it meant that no stone was left unturned. The strategies that underpin the LTP were a big improvement on previous ones. So the infrastructure strategy is a genuinely strategic document now, and I'd like to acknowledge our colleagues in strategy who helped put it there. The finance strategy is a bigger, more longer-term view than before, and both of them powered the consultation document, and there seems to be widespread agreement that that was the most superior one we've come up with. It was clear. It drew a high level of quite intelligent and articulate responses from the community. So that was a success. And we also managed to do something that I believe no other council has done, which was opt for a single optimum solution for the LTP, rather than presenting a series of options, some of which we know were not optimal. But on the face of it, that's what the legislation calls for. Now, that took a little bit of work with Audit New Zealand to reach that point. But the argument was won by simply the thoroughness of the process. Everything that I talked about earlier, OPEX, CAPEX review, all of those things were so thorough that we were able to mount a convincing and compelling argument that the LTP option we were putting forward was the best one for the city. And ultimately that was accepted and has set a precedent across New Zealand local government. Now there's some other detail there. Officer responses to individual submissions, the amendment process, which identified the amendments we just spoke about in the previous item. All of that was better than surprises on the day, lack of structure, lack of process. So while the rest of the document, and I'm not going to go through each page of it, spells out fine-tuning and tweaks to things like asset plans and so forth, that overview had widespread acceptance among all the survey respondents, and seems to be the state of play in most people's minds. So at that point, I'm happy to take questions on individual technical items that come up later in the document, but that is the 5-minute overview of the LTP. I think to round it off at a personal level, and some of you have heard this little speech before, remembering that we came off the back of not one but two annual plans. The first annual plan was pre-lockdown, pre-COVID, and the second was with all COVID impacts incorporated. So we had two annual plans in the middle of the LTP process. We also had the financial impacts of lost revenue and lack of international visitors and tourists and so forth. In there, we ran a complete zero-based budget process. We had to deal with great volatility in the capital program, with monies coming in from central government and other variables. The net effect was that we've got no change to core levels of service for the city. We have an expansive capital program that will take the city forward in terms of infrastructure, jobs, employment, and a rates rise that is, there are arguments about the level, but certainly relative to other major metros and other even medium-sized cities around New Zealand is relatively low. So that combination is quite difficult under the circumstances we were in, and having to do that, or being able to do that in a very cooperative, open, collegiate way between management and governance was quite a trek to pull off. And I'd just like to acknowledge the goodwill that went in from everybody involved in that process. So at that point, I'd probably hand back to councillors and see if there are any questions about specific issues.
All right, Peter, thank you very much for the comments and for the report. Let's now move to questions. So if people could raise their hand if they've got a question for Peter. No questions on this one. All right. So we've got a recommendation, or a number of recommendations in front of us. I'll just note that this same report is going to the Audit and Risk Management Committee next Friday for their information, and obviously just to close the loop on this for the Audit and Risk Committee as well. I'm happy to move the recommendations in front of us. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Sarah? Yeah, thank you. So moved by Andrew, seconded by Sarah. Is there any debate on this? Jimmy Chen.
Thank you, Chair. So firstly, I would like to take this opportunity, particularly to acknowledge the staff, particularly under the Chief Executive Don, and also Peter Ryan and all those staff. They have done an amazing job. We go through almost the one whole year through this long-term plan, and also thank you for the Deputy Mayor Andrew Turner, particularly chairing a number of the key activity plan. That's actually for the positive preparing for our long-term plan, the 2021 to 31 the process. So to make this process very successful. But I think the feedback, regarding to those funding, that's very crucial and important, because like Peter, he mentioned earlier, there's 58 responses from the elected member and also from the staff, and also we listen and we review all those fundings. That's very, very comprehensive. Particularly, my view, this the kind of funding, it's not a report only. Actually, it's for our future, the continue the improvement of a long-term plan process. Because in here, particularly mentioned the funding, like to give the elected member, councillor, even to the community board, can get involved in the early stage. Particularly, like we review those the strategic framework in the early stage, because this strategic framework is very crucial, to include in those strategic directions. Those are the principles, are the common outcomes, particularly for the strategic priorities. All those the long-term plan, annual plan should be follow this strategic direction. So my personal view, that's very crucial. The other one we particularly highlight, our future is continue to build on the climate change, and also resilient community, and to avoid any kind of risk, long-term plan. But how do we to make that happen? So the future, the annual plan, in an annual basis, that's very crucial and important. The other one is whether still can possible, because the community boards in the local level, whether those chair and deputy chair can be still slightly earlier to get involved in our discussion of this process long-term plan. So summary, generally speaking, it's very successful long-term plan process. So I look forward to for the future improvement for the next and following the long-term plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Melanie.
I was going to say pretty much exactly what Jimmy said, just that I thought the LTP process was a good process, and it was very collaborative and very long, and I wanted to thank Andrew again for leading that process too. And I know we just had the amendment report just before, but I thought actually that process of writing amendments and putting them through and looking at each of them, I actually thought that was very effective, and I was very pleased with it. But it was also helped by the fact that our local community board governance team, the Spoden Cashmere team, actually helped write some of the amendments that I put forward for that, and they ended up being successful. So I think what that says is that we do, again, like Jimmy said, need to look more carefully, thoroughly as councillors, and take responsibility too to make sure the community board plans have a larger voice when we go through this process, because it's quite easy for those things to get lost with everything else that we're looking at. So I'd really like that to be a bit more of a focus for the next term.
Thank you very much. Tim.
Thank you, Andrew, and I won't reiterate too much with regards to thanking the team that put this together. It was very good. One thing, though, that we do need to always concentrate on, we talk a lot always about trying to get those groups, whether they're minority groups or others that have not been part of the consultation before, to try and bring them in. I know that in our ward, we had one group who chose to come through one email, but that was how they chose to do it, and put all the emails in that, and it wasn't really counted. So I think we still have a wee way to go with regards to how our bureaucracy works and it doesn't fit in with those new groups approaching us, and it was kind of a bit of a negative for them. And so I think there are always ways to improve. It was an outstanding way to go forward, but I do think we need to take that on board if we're going to have some real value in getting any new groups, irrelevant of whether they're minority or English language as a second language. We have to look at what we do and how we do that, and I think there's still some work to do there. So thank you.
Thank you. Anne.
Right. Yeah, just following on from that, this is the ongoing challenge is always to make this complex document and information understandable and accessible to everybody. And going into the annual plan, I think that is got to be key in terms of how we design the information that we put out to the community. And I do wonder if there's an opportunity to have a working group or to come together representing, I know we have our multicultural advisory group, but a wider group of people to come together with elected members is actually really design, along with Katie and the team, the type of information that could be really relevant and useful. So I look forward to having more conversations about that. I think that's a huge challenge for us to make sure that all residents understand exactly the decisions that are being made and that they have a voice in them. But I also would like to thank everybody that was involved in this. It was terrific, really positive process. So thank you.
Thank you. Pauline.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, that's good now. Thank you.
Yeah, hey, I support everything everybody said. It was a great process. Gosh, we got to know each other pretty well, didn't we? Spending hours and hours and hours together. But it was a really good process in that way. I particularly like to acknowledge the consultation document. I think it was really clear with really good diagrams, pictures, graphs, explanations and links. And I think that was reflected in the way the submitters came and spoke to us in the chamber there. They had a really good understanding, it seemed to me, of actually not just, look, it's not just about what I want, it's actually a whole global picture of the situation of the finances, the balancing out over all our programs, everything that we're doing in the city of Christchurch. It seemed to me that people had a lot more understanding of that and reaching out and wanting to partner with us. And as a result, we've come out of this with having established a series of partnership funds, which is really incredible. And we're starting to see those come to fruition now. The community partnership funds, the environment funds, the biodiversity ones, the climate change, the water partnership. So I think that is a wonderful turn of events that we're seeing in this city, that we're actually all beginning to work together for the betterment of Christchurch. So I just wanted to really acknowledge that. I think it's a really important step for our city, and we're just going forwards. And thank you, Peter, for all the work you've done and the staff for everything on this. So it was a good process. Cheers.
Thank you. Leanne.
Just briefly, I kind of wanted to acknowledge, and I accept what others have said, I just wanted to acknowledge the significance of the getting the audit office to accept the fact that we had considered the options and that some things were just essentially non-negotiables. We had to put them out there. The investment in the Three Waters infrastructure, for example, even with the uncertainty that we face, it was an absolute obligation that we had, not just to our current generations, but to future generations as well. So I think that is a bit of a turning point for where councils may be able to go in the future in terms of developing long-term plans. It's interesting, I was just watching a feed on Twitter this morning, which was making some comments around government spending, and the comment was made, I'd like to see budgets more like LTPs so that the media and the public can see the true cost, options and trade-offs. And I think that there's a lot of merit in that often we're put under more scrutiny of spending at a local government level than central government is. And some of the advantages of that approach at the local government level could actually benefit central government, but then some of the streamlining of the processes could benefit the way that local government's able to engage much more upfront and personally with its residents. So, I just think that staff have done an incredible job this time round to really bring all of the information in front of us, and it is a complex set of information. I did take note from the fact that we do need to bring forward the amendment time so that staff have got time to actually do the work, so that when we make considered decisions at the sort of 11th hour, as it were, that sufficient work has been able to be done in order to make for a meaningful process. So thank you very much, Peter, for an excellent report, and I'm happy to support that today.
Thank you. Yanni.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I want to acknowledge all the work that's gone in. Obviously, it's a pretty exhaustive process. I think from my point of view, like, appreciate the point that the Mayor's just made, but, you know, to be fair, some of these issues were raised over a year ago with the organisation. So if you look at the Bromley traffic issue, that was in the annual plan submission that the community board had made. It was then again in the LTP submission, and it was still ruled out of order to get an amendment. So if we can't get advice within a year on to do something constructive on a community board plan, then I don't think that's just 11th hour. I think there's some issues we need to deal with the organisation. I think the other change is that community boards are now required to purchase services from the council. So that's a completely different approach than what we've had many years ago, which now means that for the boards to do anything, they have to find the budget and then pay for the services from the council HQ. And I think that is quite an inefficient and ineffective way of dealing with things that the community have raised. So I do think we can look towards some improvements there. And I'm hopeful, optimistic that our strengthening community strategy refresh that we're doing, one that we've just agreed to put out for consultation yesterday, can maybe start to resolve some of those efficiencies at a local level. I think the frustration for people in the community was around the access to the information. And I want to acknowledge the staff using new technology this time to try and give greater clarity around the different projects. Although, again, I think that's a bit of a work in progress, and that we do need to try and make the capital program sheets available. But, you know, at least we've tried something new to give people greater information. It was interesting. I went back and looked at a community board plan from, I think it was 1999, and it had detailed information on a line item basis for what was happening in the local board area. And I think we still need to try and think about how we can provide meaningful information at a local level to help people engage in the process. And certainly a number of submissions that we heard, people were quite critical of the difficulty in finding information and getting responses to questions that they had asked well ahead of the time. But I just wanted to acknowledge that this is really good to get a report from staff looking at lessons learned and improvements that we can make. And I just wanted to support the ongoing continuous improvement we have around these processes. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else wanting to speak to this? All right. So certainly from my point of view, really good to get this closeout report. I think it's good practice that we're looking at this in this way relatively quickly after the end of the process. I reiterate the comments that I made in relation to the financial performance report. This LTP was developed during what was anything but a normal year, with a number of other challenges and matters of priority that were going on at the same time, largely because of COVID. Peter certainly made the comment that the development of this LTP came on the back of what had been anything but normal annual plan process, where we essentially had to do the annual plan twice because of the effects of COVID. The highlights and standouts for me was the co-creative approach that we took to the development of this long-term plan. Certainly the workshops and the briefings where relevant, knowledgeable staff were working closely with elected members to do a deep dive into particular areas, both in terms of operational and levels of service, and also looking in detail at the capital programme, and with a really strong focus for the capital programme, not only on affordability, but also on deliverability. And that's something that I've certainly raised in every annual plan and long-term plan while I've been around the table. But I think we really took that very seriously this time, looking at the deliverability of the capital programme at the same time as we were looking at its affordability. In terms of the amendments process and in terms of the consultation process, I felt the simplicity and the plain language in the consultation documents and the way that particular questions were put forward generated meaningful answers, meaningful comment and engagement feedback from the community that we were actually able to take into account and work with. And I think we demonstrated that we listened to a lot of that feedback in the way that the amendments were put forward and dealt with. A number of the amendments that were put forward did result in changes to the final plan. And a lot of those amendments responded directly to the feedback that we'd had from residents in relation to that very clear consultation document that we put out. So really, they were just some highlights for me. Overall, I think it was a good collaborative, co-creative process. There's a lot of good that we would want to replicate in future long-term plans. And clearly, there are some improvements that we could make as we would expect. And I think the process that we've gone through with this report and the survey that's been taken into account as well was a good way of capturing that information in a meaningful way. The job now is to make sure that we put those learnings into practice in future annual plan and particularly future long-term plan processes. But thanks to everybody involved in getting us to this point. So in the absence of any further comments, I will put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against? Any abstentions? That's carried. Thank you.